All right, everyone. We're here for another video. So this next video is going to be on a topic that, is very interesting to me. I'm a big history buff, so history is something I really try to read up on and constantly, stay up to date on. So I'm going to talk a little bit about history today, but specifically, I'm going to talk about the history of one particular region of the world, which a lot of people may not know a whole lot about, may not even, if they hear the name, they might not even know what that means. But in my opinion, this region of the world has had a profound, immense impact on the world, on human civilization, etc. So, the topic of today's discussion is going to be what is called the Eurasian Steppe. So, what does that mean? What's the Eurasian Steppe? Well, first let's look at the name, Eurasian. So what does that tell us? It's somewhere in Europe and or Asia. Okay? The next part of this is steppe. What does a steppe mean? To step, like to walk? No, it's not. And it's actually spelled a little bit differently. It's not spelled S-T-E-P. It's spelled S-T-E-P-P-E. Okay, steppe. So in essence, what a steppe is to put it simply, it's kind of in between like a forest and a desert, right? It can be very arid, kind of almost desert-like, with not a whole lot of grass, some grass, kind of dried out grass. Or it could be even almost like a forest steppe where it's almost a forest. It's pretty green, but it's just kind of flat land. It's just open land. There's not a whole lot of trees. There's not mountains. So in essence, what a steppe is, it's almost similar to a prairie. It's just a really long, just flat open land, just a bunch of flat, long grass as far as the eye can see, with no trees or anything, just empty, open grass. So that's a steppe. So based upon that, the Eurasian steppe is the steppe of Eurasia. So a big, long strip of open, just flat prairie, ranging from grass to kind of almost arid, like kind of dry, almost yellowish grass, which stretches all across, from Asia to Europe, right? So that is that Eurasian steppe runs from moving east to west, starts from northeast China, what is today called the region of Manchuria, running through Mongolia, running through Kazakhstan, running through the European portion of Russia, or at least, a large portion of it, and then ultimately running into Ukraine. And that's kind of where it ends. So this is a very important region which has had a big impact on history, human civilization, you name it, huge impact. So I'm going to start back as far as we can go. And one thing that I should start to note is I'm talking about how this has had a big impact on civilization, but it should be noted that the majority of these different cultures and peoples that lived in this region were not what would technically be called quote-unquote civilizations. Civilizations generally refers to something where the culture has a written language. Generally, they're sedentary. They live in a city. They have architecture. They, like I said, have writing, a written language. They have agriculture, etc. So sedentary, written. They usually have like a written kind of, philosophy or religion or written code of kind of their, right and wrong, and, etc. So these people were they were nomads. They were not sedentary. They were very, by and large, nomads. They rode on horseback, and they were nomadic. They did not have a set home. They traveled back and forth, right? And many of them, the majority of them, did not have a written language. Further extrapolate from that, in not having a written language, they did not have a written code of, morality or philosophy or right and wrong. They had their beliefs, they had religious beliefs, but it wasn't like a written, almost like a formalized written philosophy in the same way that an organized religion has, or Greek philosophy had, or Confucianism in China had. They had more of like an orally transmitted culture. They were pretty much all pagan. They worshipped many gods. They their beliefs kind of were passed down orally, and kind of were very maybe malleable, and kind of maybe changed throughout the years. So that's just a very important kind of back note regarding the peoples of this region. So going as far back as we can, we're going to talk about the first profound impact that the peoples of the Eurasian steppe had upon the world and had upon civilization, even though they would not meet the formal definition that's usually used to describe a quote-unquote civilized society or civilized culture. So the first, the oldest, group from this that had a major impact were the people of what are called by anthropologists the Yanmaya civilization, or not civilization, but the Yanmaya culture, which was based in modern day parts of Ukraine, eastern Ukraine, and also the portion of European Russia north of the Caucasus, east of the Urals, right? The Ural Mountains. So kind of just above southern Russia. And the Yanmaya culture were what are also referred to by linguists as the Proto-Indo-Europeans. So we talked about in another video, the Indo-European language family, biggest language family in the world, includes languages of Europe, India, Iran, Afghanistan, biggest language family in the world. And the root language where all those other languages arose from started in the Eurasian steppe, specifically in the region I just mentioned. It was the Yanmaya culture. They were the Proto-Indo-Europeans. So these people spread all throughout other parts of Eurasia. They first spread to modern-day Turkey, became the Hittites. They spread to what is the Tarim Basin of western Xinjiang province in China, and became what are called the Tocharians. They spread to Central Asia and became the people known as the Aryans, not to be confused with what we commonly associate with that name. And those people later on spread to India and Iran and became, founded those civilizations of those regions. They spread throughout the rest of Europe and became the speakers of the Germanic languages, English, German, etc., as well as the Romance languages, Spanish, Italian, as well as the Slavic languages. So they had a major impact. Linguistically, they spread their language all throughout Eurasia, and this would branch off into numerous different languages, which would become an entire language family, and which would become the biggest language family in the world. And one other major thing that should be noted that they did is and this is huge. This has had a major impact in the world. I can't think of what course human civilization would have gone if it were not for this. But they are, as we understand it, they were the first to domesticate the horse. So they domesticated the horse. So imagine human civilization, obviously before the invention of the car, or obviously not counting after the invention of the car, but before the invention of the car, which was in the 1900s. So from as long as humans have been around on this earth to the 1900s, think about how things would have been different if there was not the domestication of the horse, if people did not ride on horseback. And it should also be noted, they even spread this influence even further. It's noted by the history of China that the Han Chinese, the first, or not the first, one of the greatest empires of China, actually learned how to domesticate the horse through contact with some of these Indo-European speakers of these Indo-European languages. It is believed probably the Scythians, also of the same region, the Eurasian steppe, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But that is the first major civilization, or first major culture from this region that had a profound impact on world civilization. Now we are going to move to the Aryans. So before we get into that name is very highly charged, and that's a whole video in itself. The name and where did this name come from. But that's another video for another time. But I'm going to say right now, this is not referring to Germans. This is not referring to Germany. This is not referring to Nazis. They pretty much kind of took that name based upon some misconceptions of the time, but it applies to a different group of people who lived in what is today Central Asia. So they lived around Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, even parts of modern-day Xinjiang province of China. And this is what anthropologists and historians and archaeologists, etc., refer to as the Andronovo culture. But the native name for these people were the Aryans, which in their language meant nobility. And again, like I said, this name has gotten a negative connotation because of how it was misused by the Nazis. But it was the native name of those people, and in fact, it is where the name Iran is derived from. The Iranian people is derived from the word Aryan. So it's almost a shame that it's kind of now, it's almost taboo to refer to that term, because it is the native name of a particular country, and more than one country. The inhabitants of India also refer to themselves as that name. So, but that's another story. That's a whole nother topic for another time. But so they were the inhabitants of modern day Central Asia, and they also had a very big impact on human civilization. One, as I mentioned, they would branch off and immigrate out of their Central Asian homeland into India, and became the peoples who would become the people of India today. And all of the languages of northern India are derived from their language. And then also later on, that was about the 1800s BC that they immigrated to India. Around the 1400s BC, a little later, they immigrated to modern day Iran, Afghanistan, even parts of Turkey and Iraq. They're around the Kurdistan region. And their language became the foundation for the Iranian languages today. So that is Persian or Farsi, Kurdish, Pashto, etc. So yeah, they had a huge cultural impact And of course, their culture would later on spawn great kingdoms in India, as well as, the Persian Empire in Iran. And in addition to all that, they are also had a huge impact in that they are the people who invented, or are believed, as we know it today, to have invented the chariot. So the chariots you see in all the old movies of Romans and, ancient, Mesopotamia, people riding in chariots. Well, that's where the chariot came from. Was from the people who referred to themselves as the Aryans, who were the core or originative culture whereby Indian culture and Iranian culture originated. So now moving forward, we're going to talk about the next major group that had a profound impact on human civilization. That was from the Eurasian steppe, and that is the Scythians. So they were from around the same region as the Aryans, and they were descended from them as well. They were, part of the same, the kind of like a later incarnation, you could say, of that same people. And they lived in the region they actually spread a little bit east and west. So they lived also, as the Aryans, around Kazakhstan, or Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan. They also spread west to the European part of Russia, kind of around where the Yan Maya culture originally originated. Also to parts of Ukraine, where the Yan Maya culture also originated. And even certain groups related to that broad culture even went as far east as Western Mongolia, and even parts of the Xinjiang province of China. So they spread very far. And there were numerous different peoples who this term Scythian was almost like kind of like a macro term, right? It was named after one particular group, I believe it was named, called the Saka. The name Scythian is the Greek version of that name. They were the ones that Greeks refer to as the Scythians, were the people from around the Ukraine Black Sea region who they had a lot of contact with. So that name has been kind of applied as like a macro label for the whole group, but it also included very specific groups of people, such as like I said, the Saka, the Dahe, the Parni, the Masagate, the Alans, who actually their name Alan is derived from the word Aryan, the Sarmatians, and the Alans and Sarmatians are also famous for being part of the some of the invasions of the Roman Empire. So yeah, large group of people, and they've had, like kind of touched upon it a little bit just now, but they've had big impacts on a lot of major civilizations, major cultures. They played a major role in the fall of the Neo-Assyrian Empire, right? So along with the Medes, and I believe the Medes and the Babylonians, the Scythians also played a major role in bringing down this large empire, which was the largest empire of its time, and ruled a large portion of what is today the Middle East. So they had played a major role in that. They also, like I said, had contact with the Greeks. Certain groups amongst them were part of the invasions of the Roman Empire that eventually led to the fall of the Roman Empire. They oftentimes had a lot of contact with the Persian Empire, sometimes as adversaries, and they also played a very had a very big impact on India, but we'll get to that a little bit later. So that's another group that had a big, from the Eurasian steppe, that had a very big impact on human civilization. And I want to reiterate, just like the other ones, just like the Yanmaya and the Aryans, the Scythians they were nomadic, they were pagan, they did not have a written language, largely. So they were famous for riding on horseback. So they all shared a lot of the same features, same traits. Now we're going to talk about another major group they're called a variety of different names. And there's a lot of debate about, are all these names connected? But they're most commonly referred to as the Huns. So we generally know of the Huns through the invasion of the Roman Empire, which the catalyst that led to the fall of the Roman Empire. So there's a lot of uncertainty about what the origin of the Huns was, where they originally came from. However, some people believe that and a lot of scholars believe this, but there's still not yet a consensus. But there are a lot of people who believe this. A lot of people believe that they originated from modern-day Mongolia. Now, in Chinese history, we hear of a people called the Xiongnu. The Xiongnu. And these were people from modern-day Mongolia, which were often a thorn in the side to the various Chinese empires and kingdoms. And like I said, they were nomads. They were very skilled on horseback. They were often very kind of like a very rough people, very, very warlike people. They would often invade China. At times, they even kind of had the upper hand against China. They made China their tributary. They made China pay tribute to them. So, they had a lot of relations with China and made a big impact on Chinese culture. In fact, the initial building of the Great Wall in China was built to keep out the Xiongnu. So they had a very big impact. And some people, like I said, some scholars believe that they were the synonymous with the Huns. And even if I don't know if any of you have seen the movie Mulan, the Disney movie, but in the Disney movie Mulan, you see people who are kind of very depicted as similar to the Mongolians who invade China and are kind of like aggressive nomads. But in Mulan, they are referred to as the Huns. So that is very likely why they're referred to as the Huns, because they, in the movie they could have, maybe, based out those people on the Xiongnu, but they wanted to use a term that the average American audience would understand and relate to, so they would use the term the Huns. So the Xiongnu had a big impact on Chinese civilization, and they also, if we can ascertain that they were connected to the Huns of Europe, we can say that they also had an impact on Europe. So we're gonna go a little bit further. We're gonna get there a little bit later, but to kind of go back to the Scythians. So we're gonna go to how the Scythians had affected another region, had a great impact on another region of the world, and that's India. So there was a group of people referred to as the Yuezhi by Chinese sources. So the Yuezhi were from around northwestern, kind of central northwestern China, the region known today as Gansu. And these were a people who, through war with the Xiongnu, were pushed out of their homeland and pushed westward. So they fled into modern-day Kazakhstan. Well, at the time, that was populated by the Scythians. And there's a lot of debate about who the Yuezhi actually were. Some people believe that they may have been Scythians themselves, a branch of the Scythians. But in any event, there were Scythians who were living in modern-day Kazakhstan. Yuezhi were pushed west by the Xiongnu. They move into that region. They push the Scythians south. Scythians move through modern-day Afghanistan, which was populated by the Greco-Bactrian kingdom, which was like a mix of, Iranian civilization, Indian civilization, and Greek civilization. So they go through there. They utterly kind of just, ransack that kingdom. And then the USG keep pushing themselves, so they go even further, and they go into modern-day Pakistan. And then the USG settle in what is today Afghanistan. So from that point on, after having conquered conquered large portions of modern-day Pakistan and northwest India, the Scythians founded the Indo-Scythian kingdom, which had a big impact on Indian civilization. They patronized Buddhism. They were famous for building a lot of very famous and very important Buddhist monuments. And also the USG, who pushed themselves, settled in modern-day Afghanistan, and they founded what was one of the great empires of its time, which was the Kushan Empire. And they were major patrons of Buddhism. They are actually the empire which played a major role, if not the first role that actually caused this in spreading Buddhism to China. So it was an empire that eventually would, kind of even stretch further south and even conquer the Indo-Scythians, and would take over large portions of Pakistan, modern-day Pakistan and Western India, and through contact with the peoples of those regions, they converted to Buddhism, and then from there spread even Buddhism to Central Asia, and then through the Chinese contact with peoples of Central Asia, Buddhism was transmitted to China. So the USG and the Scythians, both who populated the Eurasian steppe region and were nomads, had a major impact on the history of India and China. So that's another really huge way that people from the Eurasian steppe had an immense impact on the world. So the next way, or the next group that had a large impact, we're going to go back to the Xiongnu. So, following this fall of the Xiongnu Empire, there were a group of people referred to in Europe as the Xionites, and who were referred to in India as the Huna, who took over what is modern-day Afghanistan, and then later took over large portions of what is today Pakistan and northwestern India. And these people were, like I said, referred to in the West as the Xionites, and referred to in India as the Huna. So if you hear by the name Huna, clearly you can see the resemblance to the term Hun. So you can see why some people would think that these people were connected to the Huns. And a lot of people think that these people, the Xionites, originated from what is modern-day Mongolia, around where the Xiongnu had lived. And it should also be noted that Xiongnu is spelled, the first letter of Xiongnu is spelled with an X, right? Xiongu. Right? Well, the term Xionite, which is spelled Xionite, also starts with an X, comes from the term that they were referred to in the Iranian languages, which was spelled Xyon, probably pronounced something along the lines of Chion. But Chion, Xiongnu, there was another branch of the Xiongnu referred to as the Xionyun, right? Xionyun, Chion, both spelled with an X. You can see how there's some kind of similarity in the names, and also the Huna, Huns. So as we can see based upon that, these are some of the things that have led a lot of anthropologists and historians and whatnot to believe that there's a chance that the Xionites and the Xiongnu and the Huna and the Huns were all the same people, or at least connected in some way. But yeah, so the Xionites or the Huna first immigrated from what is today Mongolia and overran the kingdoms overran the Kushan Empire, and they formed 4 different kingdoms or states. They formed the Kitterite people. There were the Kitterite people, the Hephthalite people, the Alkon, and the Nizak. And as I said, a lot of historians would refer to these as Huns. So they would say the Kitterite Huns, the Hephthalite Huns, the Alchon Huns, and the Nizak Huns. And the Hephthalites were a major power, a pretty strong power of their time. They were, let's talk about the Kitterites. They overran the Kushan Empire. And in fact, they carried on that name. So while historians call them the Kitterites, they called themselves the Kushan. So some historians would call them the little Kushan. So they carried on the legacy, or at least attempted to carry on the legacy of the Kushans, and they were big patrons of Buddhism. And then there were the Hephthalites, who later came and overrode the Kitterites, with the assistance initially allying themselves with the Persian Empire, the Sasanian Persian Empire. And they would soon become a huge major thorn in the side of the Persian Empire. They in fact killed the Persian king, the Persian Emperor Shah. That was the king Piruz. And then after that, they kind of claimed the title. They claimed that they were the true Sasanian kings, and they went and kind of ransacked Iran for a couple years, about maybe I think it might be as long as 20 years. And they spread further south into India, where they did patronize Buddhism for a large portion of the time. And then from the Hephthalites, the branch that went to India were referred to as the Alkon Huns. And they conquered a large portion of India. They actually made it as far east as the city of Pataliputra, which was the capital of a lot of major Indian empires. And like I said, they initially patronized Buddhism, but then later on, it's believed that some of them actually some of their kings actually began to patronize Hinduism, particularly the branch that worshipped the god Shiva. And it is actually believed that these kings who patronized who were patrons of the god Shiva actually did a lot of major persecutions of Buddhism. But in any event, they played a major role in the course of history in the major civilizations of Iran and India. And then, of course, to finish off the topic on the Huns, we have the Huns, which we most formally know as the Huns, the group that was referred to as the Huns in Europe, under the king Attila the Hun. Now, he started out in around the region of where the Yanmaya culture was, Ukraine, Western Russia, and then spread into what is modern-day Hungary, and that was pretty much the basis of his kind of tribal, his nomadic empire. And he's famous for kind of just, leaving carnage and, destruction wherever he went. And he eventually was the catalyst for the fall of the Roman Empire. He invaded Rome. He even, sacked Rome for a bit before, mysteriously leaving after. And he was the one responsible for displacing the Germanic tribes that would eventually officially bring about the end of the Western Roman Empire. So that is the people of the Xiongnu, Xionites, Huna, Huns, who many people believe were all connected.